Throughout human history, the great philosophers of old spoke of many things. But above all, their one consensus was that there was no statement a person could make unto which there would be a universal agreement. Tim Burton's made some weird shit. Alright, now that I've disproven hundreds of years of philosophical consensus, I'm now going to disprove decades of public belief. Tim Burton made a good movie once. Yeah, it's a thing that happened, believe it or not. And not just a good movie, but honestly one I'd argue is a masterpiece. One that makes you think about the deeper meaning of storytelling. That movie, well, you saw the title. It's of course Bigfish. Well, hello fine gentlemen and gentle ladies. It's that part of the video where I shamelessly beg for subscribers again. I want to make this quick to save us both some time, so, click on that subscribe button, hit the bell icon if you enjoy the video, and let's get on with this. Thanks. As you can probably guess, I'm not the biggest fan of Tim Burton. He's a fine enough filmmaker in his own right, but I've always found his style so strange and unpleasant to look at. That's not to say I don't enjoy some of his movies. I like his original Batman film, as well as the Sleepy Hollow movie, but only on a well, this is easy to watch and I have nothing better to do level. Kind of like you guys who watch my YouTube videos. But Bigfish is a film I've heard about for years. It was a movie I'd been wanting to watch, but just kept forgetting about it. Yeah, it was one of those. Finally, I saw it recommended to me on Hulu and decided to give it a go. Only once I began watching it did I notice the film was directed by Tim Burton. I have to say, this film is really a masterpiece. The story is amazingly complex and well woven together. Tim Burton's usual visual style is a bit more subdued here, but it works in a way that benefits the film greatly. And the emotional depth that its story is able to portray is quite poetic. But above all else, the thing that jumped out at me the most about this film was how it showcased the power of a lie used to tell the truth. Let me explain. For those of you unfamiliar with the premise of Bigfish, the story revolves around a son who feels as if he doesn't really know his father, because his dad only ever told him tall tales when he asked about his life. Now that his father is dying, he does his best to reconcile their relationship, and hopes to finally learn some of the true versions of events of his father's life. This storyline runs concurrently to his father's life story, the way his father told it anyway. Ed Bloom, the father, recounts a life of varying degrees of insanity. Some of the things he describes are believable enough, even if perhaps a little exaggerated, such as being a star athlete, being awarded the town key, joining the circus, and becoming a traveling salesman. But sprinkled into the believable parts of his story is, well, the unbelievable. He meets a witch when he is a child, and she shows him how he will die. He saves a town from a 15-foot tall giant and befriends him. Time literally stops when he meets the love of his life. His boss at the circus is a werewolf. He escapes Vietnam with the help of two-headed conjoined twins and is presumed dead by the US military. And of course, for good measure, he robs a bank with a poet he met in a magically secluded town many years earlier. I'm not even kidding. Among many other insane adventures. The only unusual thing that happens in my life is having to deal with my cat throwing up on the floor various times of the day. Not again. Of course, much of the life story of Ed Bloom seems flat out impossible in reality. But his son digs deeper and deeper into his father's life and begins to discover that there is some truth behind all his father's tall tales. When digging through his father's garage, he discovers a letter detailing his father's supposed death in Vietnam, and he finds a deed for a place at the location of the supposedly magically secluded town. Upon further investigation, he decides to travel to this town and meets a woman who knew his father. She then begins to tell him all that she knows of his father, in a much more grounded fashion. But there's still some unbelievable aspects to her story as well, such as the giant helping Ed rebuild her home, and Ed having made his friends rich enough for them to be able to help him buy the entire town and save it from ruin. Finally, the woman tells him that she became a shut-in after his father left, and rumors began to float around that she had become a witch. He then tells her that that's impossible, because his father met the witch when he was just a child, to which the woman responds that Ed saw any woman that wasn't his wife as a witch. This is where we begin to see some of the truth in Ed's lies. Sure, he didn't literally meet a witch, but saying he did better conveyed how he felt than just saying things plainly. It may not have been the entire truth, but in that lie there was a deeper, more emotional, raw truth that would not have been understood had he just told his story outright. Had Ed told his story plainly, that also would have been a lie in a sense, because then his listener would not understand the deeper, emotional truth he felt. Furthermore, saying he met a witch made his story more memorable, and thus the real truth behind it having more power in the minds of the people he told his story to. This film does an amazing job at teaching all of us that perhaps even though some things may be exaggerated or even made up to benefit a story, that doesn't mean there aren't inherent truths to be taken away from it. Throughout the story we learn many more truths in this sense. When Ed unfortunately finally dies, We see many familiar faces at his funeral. We see the conjoined twins. We see the giant, not a 15-foot tall man, but a 7 or 8 foot tall one. We see Ed's old boss from the circus. Although not a werewolf, he's there to honor his friend, thus showing a side that wasn't a greedy business owner, but a loyal companion, paralleling very nicely with the idea of dual personas that werewolves embody, among many other characters from along the journey, serving as further proof that there is truth behind Ed's life story. As to what really happened and what was made up is left to interpretation, but in the end, we come to understand it doesn't really matter. It never did. What mattered was Ed's retelling was how he saw the truth in his eyes. And while all the characters that show up to Ed's funeral were told different versions of his stories and had different versions of his life events in their heads, they were all on the same level of understanding. Because of Ed's stories, they all knew who he was as a person, thus knowing him on a far more personal level than simple trivial knowledge of how exactly he lived his life would let them. These stories may not be accurate, but they help us understand who Ed was far better than a simple retelling of events would. And no character embodies this idea more than Ed's son. Throughout the film, Ed's son acts as a surrogate for the viewer. Yeah, I know, I make this parallel with characters a lot, but just bear with me. He doesn't believe any of the fantastical stories his father tells him, but as we begin to understand how the lies embody a certain kind of truth, so does he. And by the end, and admittedly one of the hardest scenes to watch in the film just because of how damn sad it is, his father is now in his last moments in a hospital bed and asks him to tell him how his life ends. This is where Ed's son finally understands why lying is sometimes the only way to convey a deeper truth than simply regurgitating the exact fact of something as it is. He could have easily told his father that he dies in a hospital bed with him by his side, but instead, he recounts a dramatic, funny, and heartwarming ending to his father's life. They comedically break out of the hospital and drive away at high speeds in an action-packed sequence in order to reach the end in time. And then they arrive at a lake. All of Ed's friends are there to see him off and wish him well, in a very heartwarming moment, topped with one last kiss from his wife, the love of his life. He then dies peacefully, floating down into the water, before transforming into a big fish, beginning a new life, living on after death. The scene then cuts back to the hospital bed, and Ed passes away peacefully, happy his son finally understands him. Although the story Ed's son tells him is of course a complete lie up front, it perfectly summarizes the power behind a lie when it comes to telling the truth, as there is far more truth to the story than one may find at face value. Ed did live a life that was comedic at times. The way he lived was action-packed, and above all, Ed was a very caring and compassionate person who deeply loved his wife and his friends. This story of how Ed dies is who Ed was as a person, his very being encapsulated by him transforming when he dies, and taking on new life with all of his friends and family clapping around him. This too holds truth in reality as, even though he passes away, Ed's stories live on. He still lives in the stories he told and the people whose lives he's affected. So in a sense he is reborn again after he dies. This culminates in Ed's son recounting Ed's stories to his own children, thus cementing Ed's legacy and memory for many years to come. So what can we take away from this in our own lives? Well, of course you shouldn't go out of your way to lie maliciously to people. But there are many ways you can tell the truth. Even through what may be perceived to be lies, we can bestow a deeper understanding of ourselves onto others. Well, I hope you all like this long-winded description of what a metaphor is and how it works. To prove my point one more time, remember how in the beginning of the video I spoke about the great philosophers of old and their one consensus was that no statement could be made that everyone would universally agree with? Yeah, none of those guys said that. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. No, not again!